Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our presentation, The Consultant's Guide to Successful Data Vault Implementations, specifically around avoiding failure. We are Daniel and Brett. We're both 20-year data veterans. We've been doing Data Vault for about 4 years now, and we are absolutely practitioners well in the weeds of Data Vault and all the nuances of the standards and the implementation hiccups. But we do come from a management consulting background. And that's kind of the approach we wanted to take in today's presentation, is talking about how to organize the program, how to organize the team, and how to kind of point people in the right direction so the overall Data Vault program can be successful. So let's go ahead and dive in. So a man walks into a tool store to buy a chainsaw. The clerk sells him a top-of-the-line model saying that it'll cut through 100 trees a day. So the man takes the chainsaw home and goes to work on the trees, but after working for 3 hours, he only cuts down 2 trees. So how can I cut for hours and hours and only finish 2 trees, he asks himself. So the next morning, he wakes up early and gets started right away and works until evening, but still only manages to cut down 5 trees. So the very next day, he takes the chainsaw back to the clerk and says that it doesn't work properly. So the clerk takes a look at it, says it looks okay, gives it a pull, starts it up, and the man jumps back and says, "Ah, what's that noise?"
So if your data vault implementation is only chopping down a handful of trees a day, there might be some things you can do to increase productivity. Now we're going to walk through 7 themes to make sure your data vault build out is smooth, successful, enduring, and most importantly, delivers business value. Along the way, we're going to share our lessons we've learned from our failure moments, as well as some of our success stories. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation, but more importantly, take away the key themes that will help you in your next data vault implementation.
All right, theme number 1, teamwork. We've listed out here a bunch of roles and personas that will need to participate in the Data Vault project. And our first reaction, your first reaction is probably, how is this slide different than any other data activity? And the short answer is, it's not really. But the important thing is that when the team organizes, you need to realize this is not just another Data Vault or another data project. This time, things are going to be different. And this is where Data Vault is more than a data model. We'll see by the end here that this team will deliver faster, better, higher quality, and cheaper. And that's because Data Vault is so much more than just a data modeling technique. It's a holistic approach to delivering data as product. So obviously, the first thing you do is get the right people in the room for the kickoff meeting, emphasize this new mentality. I'm going to go through this list really quick here. I'm sure everyone on this presentation is familiar with these. Obviously, business champion, obstacle remover. We found sometimes Scrum Masters don't have the clout necessary to remove some obstacles. Data or a product owner, very important. And this is going to vary by Data Vault deliverable. We'll talk more about that later. We found it's very important to have a data leader, someone with a data background, data architecture, and engineering experience. Honestly, we've seen trouble with app dev folks trying to lead Data Vault implementations. So ideally, this data leader is someone who reports to the chief data officer, but who has that data perspective. So the next 3, your Data Vault veterans, novices, and skeptics. These folks are usually full-time on the project. Everyone else kind of has a partial role. So your veterans are usually your certified consultants who have experience, been there, done that. Data Vault novices, usually again in the consulting client relationship, your novices are folks that are new to Data Vault. They're candidates for training, they're candidates for certification, and these are going to be the folks that own the platform long term. And then hopefully this gets a chuckle out of some folks. We've got our Data Vault skeptics. And so these folks need to contribute. They need to be persuaded over time. And we'll talk more about influencing these Data Vault deniers. Obviously, enterprise data architects, key participants, they have that enterprise model perspective, that relationship with the business, and will definitely help with the modeling exercises. Source system owners, very important, often overlooked. If the source system owners are not willing and excited to share their data in a performant manner, we might have a problem. So they definitely need to be at the table. And then lastly, tool and platform vendors. Usually, you sign a contract, you get a certain number of hours. These can be powerful force multipliers, like we mentioned here, code generators, code accelerators. Brett and I have written some accelerators. I'm sure several of y'all have as well. Definitely game changers in terms of productivity. Also, there are going to be scrum masters and business analysts, infrastructure folks like DBA folks, networking folks, cloud folks. And we'll talk about actually where the roles fit in a particular project on a later slide. So besides delivering our first use case, the other deliverable, if you will, for the team is to figure out an operating model for a high performing Data Vault team that can not only deliver use cases, but also coach and grow and split and multiply itself to deliver more products faster and better. It's also important to just get buy-in and participation across the organization because Data Vault is new, it's a new way of thinking. And when the consultants are gone and the Data Vault use case, the first use case has been built out, you want to make sure that the Data Vault continues to grow and thrive in a sustainable way. If you follow the standards to a T, but you don't have new thinking, you'll have a relapse. And we want to avoid relapses on our data platform. So our failure story here is something that I hinted at above. There was an organization, they actually didn't have any enterprise data architects on the project, and it was being run by an app dev leader. And unfortunately, they were thinking of everything in terms of a custom app across the data architecture. They actually had the data modeling folks were doing some focusing on naming conventions, and we really had to fight to get the business involved in the enterprise modeling. So they had the right players there, but I think they were just playing the wrong positions, and things could have been better.
Yeah, then we have our success story. And so this is from one of our more fruitful implementations of Data Vault with the local government. And we had the right team. We had all kinds. We had a room, agile hours. The room looked very similar to what you see on the screen, except for it was a bigger table, much smaller window. But we had everyone there. We had the source system owners, we had the business, we had infrastructure, we had the engineers, the DBAs, the BAs, the Scrum Master, all at the table, working together, making decisions, removing roadblocks. And more importantly, we had specific rules around food in the room. And so with all that in place, we had a successful implementation due to we had the right team.
All right, next theme. Standards. We want to socialize, evangelize, and adhere to the standards. So obviously I mentioned that kickoff meeting, we're going to talk about how Data Vault is new and different and maybe not anything like the last data project that the team did. So sourcing patterns, loading patterns, modeling patterns. We're not just doing another data project, we're actually starting a new way of delivering data as product. And we need to start thinking in terms of both building the factory, which is the Data Vault, and building the widgets, which are the individual customer deliverables or the use cases. So I want to drill down on that a little bit and make that distinction. So a use case is a widget is a use case. So we're building this Data Vault, which is the widget factory, and we're cranking out data widgets. So a widget is an independent data product that can stand by itself. It may be part of a larger system, a much larger system, but in and of itself, it is usable and valuable. So on the small side, a use case could be a report-ready table or an export used by a simple report. Or on the larger side, a use case could actually be a self-service BI mart with several facts and dimensions that support self-service and a dashboard. So any of the following could be a use case, one of these data widgets that the Data Vault factory builds. So we've got, warehouses and marts and cubes and reports, star schemas. We can backend APIs and begin caring for data scientists and other data customers. Anything that those customers deem valuable is a data widget. We want to just do one widget at a time. That's our use case. Need to remember also that Data Vault invalidates that traditional lake versus warehouse dilemma, where we can get the fast, simple, complete ingestion, which are all the lake benefits, as well as the integrated queryable performance storage, which is the warehouse benefits. And Data Vault allows us to do both of those. So as you're adhering to standards, make sure you emphasize the modeling techniques. The 2.0 standards are published, publicly available. May need to review those in a sidebar. Definitely emphasize that this is more of an ELT and not an ETL, and definitely avoid private interpretations of what Data Vault is. We encountered that once where this Data Vault standard meant one thing to one person and another thing to another person, and there was some contention there. Also, this is going to be where we make our build versus buy decision versus automation and tooling. Definitely want to take advantage of the patterns in Data Vault to deliver quickly. And also, this is where you draw your lines between custom and commodity in your architecture diagrams and realize this is where we're going to use commodity components to do things. And this is where we're going to use, we're going to have to write custom code to do a custom thing. So it's definitely a player coach model. Veterans teaching novices, rookie mistakes can be common, I know. And so we also want to make sure that when the consultants are gone, when the veterans are gone, that new way of thinking has been adopted by the team. So this is where with the Data Vault skeptics, we can show business value early. It's sometimes hard to argue when the customer says, wow, this is amazing. I needed this, a year ago. And also to ask of the Data Vault skeptics, hey, can you reserve judgment for 2 weeks and let's see what happens. We are change agents and not just Data Vault practitioners. For me personally, I'm a big fan of delivering a simple use case quickly. So this allows the team to form, to overcome the program and infrastructure, technical and tool challenges, and get a quick win. And then once we've kind of got that momentum and velocity, then we can tackle a bigger use case.
And so one of our failure stories from the socialize, evangelize, and adhere to standards comes from a Data Vault implementation where Daniel and I showed up a little bit late in the process. And this is really a story of part of a cafeteria plan type Data Vault implementation, as well as a private interpretation of standards story where we had examples where the cafeteria plan mindset where they kind of wanted to pick and choose which parts of the standards to apply and then morph those with some other traditional methods of implementations, things like choosing to implement a business hub in the business vault that's populated directly from the source. It's was a kind of a example of picking and choosing those standards and then applying a customization to the process, which really ended up not working. But I think we have a more successful story from Daniel.
Yeah, so back to the big table in a small room at a local government. So the use case we delivered, one of the use cases we delivered was the government was putting its ledger online so citizens can see how money was coming in and going out. And so we had to replicate this ledger. And so first we had put everything in raw vault, built our business layer, stuck to the standards. We had our first meeting with the customer. They pulled up their report, we pulled up our report, and we were hundreds of millions of dollars off. And my heart sank and I thought, oh man, this is going to be a long use case. So we dove into details. It was an afternoon meeting to kind of a first customer review. And the client had an epiphany. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this column. And oh, we need to filter on this column. Well, that's great. They didn't realize that we already, because we followed the Data Vault standards, we already had that column in the satellites. And because the business layer was a view, this was as simple as adding a column and adding a where clause in the view, check it in, hit refresh, and then we're only tens of millions of dollars off from each other. So we repeated, and we found over the course of the afternoon, it was a 4-hour meeting, we found 3 or 4 add a column, add a filter requirements changes. But because we had stuck to the Data Vault standards, it took us minutes to respond to these changes. And by the end of the meeting, our numbers matched, our dollars matched, and we were ready for the next level of the UAT. Because we had stuck to the standards, we were able to respond very quickly.
Let's talk about movies here. Okay, let's talk about Field of Dreams. It's a movie. It's a sports supernatural drama starring Kevin Costner. It was released in the tail end of the 1980s. Now, Kevin Costner's character is a die-hard baseball fan who, while walking through the cornfield in his farm in Iowa, hears a voice say, "If you build it, they will come." Now, it wouldn't be a spoiler alert to tell you that this financially strapped farmer ends up plowing over his cornfield to build a baseball stadium, a baseball diamond, which compels baseball players who are ghosts from the past to show up and play baseball. Now, Kevin Costner, his character, he built a field of dreams. The ghost came, his farm was saved, and everyone lived happily ever after. Now, there are three important takeaways from this cinematic segue. One, and most importantly, the movie holds up. Seriously, it's as good today as it was in the 80s. Two, it's a movie, not reality. And three, yes, this is an analogy for building out a data platform. Now, we as data professionals have the ability to architect, design, and build data products that have tremendous business value. Success can lead to a certain amount of arrogance in thought and decision-making. We don't, however, succeed on our own. We need the business at the table, and we need them at the table from the start. And we need to work from explicit business intent in order to be successful. Now, if you're a bleeding edge digital company where data is the product and the line between IT and business is blurred, you probably already know this. And then there's the rest of us. There's the rest of the organizations. How many of us have worked in organizations or have colleagues in shops maintaining these expensive yet beautifully designed data ecosystems that are hardly accessed by anybody outside of production support? In my experience, when you dig deeper into this, 9 times out of 10, these systems were built with little or no business input. The business capabilities were a best guess from bright, well-intentioned data professionals who heard that metaphorical voices, the voices in their head saying, if you build it, they will come. Now, what happens if you listen to the voices? Well, 9 times out of 10, probably disaster. So here's what we're saying. Just stop. Don't build a field of dreams. Get the business involved early. Gain that solid business sponsorship, what Daniel talked about in the beginning, with that mutually beneficial relationship. Start from a business use case, something that has measurable business value, something that is feasible, and always prioritize the business value over the technology value. Now, some red flag statements. If you're saying these things, if you're hearing these things, it's a red flag. Can we start by ingesting all the data, then figure out what to do with it later? IT's ready. We got the money, we got the people, let's get started, and then we'll bring the business along later. Red flag. Let's just replicate our legacy data warehouse structure and reports. If it's that legacy data warehouse that's not used, a wise man once said, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Start from that explicit business intent.
Yep, that's right. So our failure story here is related to our roles as consultants. So number 1 rule of consulting, the client is always right. Rule number 2 of consulting, when the client is wrong, see rule number 1. So we were actually at a Data Vault implementation, and the client said, let's just onboard the entire core banking system into the raw vault because the business doesn't have time right now. And so number 1 rule of consulting. So we started with that and actually made some great progress. But a lot of those things we wound up, objects we onboarded, we wound up not using. So there could have been a much better use of our time on the project for that point.
And then for a success story, that was our one of our greatest successes was where we started with that business intent. And so what we did is before we even got on the ground, we had the client start thinking of use cases. And use cases were derived from the business. They were prioritized by the business. So when we showed up, we were able to really weed through and figure out that specific use case that was measurable, that was feasible, and most importantly, delivered business value. So we started working from the ERP system and selected a use case for an HR dashboard with the business at the table, designed and really built along with the business at our side, went on to a finance dashboard. And finally, we left there with a successful implementation with a happy client and a happy local government.
All right, next theme, start with an enterprise view of the data. This will be a quick one. We start at the 30,000-foot view of the business, but importantly, not the whole business. So I want to make a clear distinction here. This is an enterprise view. This is not enterprise scope. We are starting with an enterprise view of our particular use case, not the entire enterprise. So enterprise view within scope, only the enterprise concepts. So this is where we perform our top-down modeling exercise. We'll perform the bottom-up modeling exercise later. We do our taxonomies and ontologies and get those what we call enterprise-aware hubs and links. We highly recommend Elephant in the Fridge by John Giles, and also it looks like from the schedule, Keith Bellinger's presentation at this conference is going to be a theme very similar to this on getting the data vault to speak your language.
And so before we get to the success story, let's talk about the failure story with the enterprise view. And so one of our first implementations where we didn't have the business at the table and we didn't start from the enterprise view, we really started modeling the raw data vault from a source system perspective. And so some of the things we would have done differently is we created multiple account hubs. And so the source system, the core system, had different definitions from accounts based upon whether they were from loan, from credit, from deposit, and so forth. And so because they had different definitions, we ended up creating multiple account hubs. When if we started from that enterprise lens, that enterprise view, we would have really thought of this from a perspective of one account hub to really look at the accounts from where the business wants to look at them, not necessarily from how the source system wants to look at the accounts.
And so our success story here, this is where I want to drill down or emphasize that concept that enterprise view is not enterprise scope. So we were at a global trading bank. The client had started with a source-centric model. We had kind of inserted and asserted ourselves to get the business engaged to do some of the enterprise modeling. And they were data vaulting their trading platform over a dozen source systems, each of ginormous source systems into a single data vault to deliver unified view to customers. And after working with the business for several days, we arrived at 4 entities. So here is a giant bank, complex trading system, and they had 4 things, 4 ontological objects that were the backbone of their data vault. So 4 things. Party was decided to be a thing that does not hold securities. An entity was a thing that does hold securities. A security is obviously a financial instrument. And lastly, a transaction is a transaction. So going back to the client is always right. My vote was for 3 entities, and that transaction was simply an intersection of the other 3. But the client said the transaction was a thing, so transaction is a thing. But the point is, this was all we needed for building out the backbone of the vault. So this ontology translated nicely into 4 what we call enterprise-aware hubs. And I want to geek it out in financial services here if we can for just a second. So for security, this security object turned into a security hub with 2 supporting links. So these are securities very similar to QSIPs and CDOLs and ISINs, FIGIs. And we found that these 3 tables, this hub and these 2 links, were able to account for all of their use cases. So with security ID and security ID type as the primary key on the security table, that identifies any security. So your security ID type is going to be your FIGI, your CDOL, your QSIP, your ISIN, or FIGI composite, FIGI global. And then what we were able to do with the same as in the hierarchy links is bring those relationships together where suppose you had 2 CDOLs trading on different exchanges, but they're the same financial thing. Well, that's the same as a relationship between those 2 securities. Or suppose you have a composite FIGI that rolls up to a global FIGI. Well, that's a hierarchy. It's a parent-child relationship. And so that hierarchy link was able to account for that. Or you've got a QSIP that rolls up to an ISIN. Same sort of thing. So the point is, for this enterprise view for an incredibly complicated system, the ontological model and the hubs and the enterprise-aware hubs and links, it wasn't 100 tables. It wasn't 1,000 tables. It wasn't dozens and dozens and dozens of objects requiring teams and teams. We started this model on paper and pencil and were able to deliver value to the customer.
All right, so if we transition from how we model to how we deliver. And so the way we see this is there's two different ways to go about this. You can deliver vertically, or you can deliver horizontally. Now, this is a typical Data Vault architecture with your sources on your left and your business capabilities on the right. Those are your data widgets. Those are your business use cases. And so how do we deliver vertically? Okay, first we get all of our source systems in place, the source system owners on board, we understand everything, we get the access, we turn on CDC where we can, and then we start ingesting all the data that we need for our use cases. We stage it, then we model it, we start building out our subsequent layers, and then finally, we start building our business capabilities. Okay, now what's wrong with this approach? The big problem here is with the delay of time to value. So business value is delayed by technical priorities when you deliver vertical, and possibly is delayed by other less valuable business use cases. Additionally, business feedback, business input is delayed until the very end, until you get to the right. And at that point, failure, which happens, failure might not be revealed until the very end. And the very end is when it's obviously too late. So how do we want to deliver? We want to go horizontal. We want to work left to right by use case and within each use case. Now, what does this do? This forces you to think with the end in mind. You start with the business capability and source only what you need to fulfill that business capability. You bring in only the data that's in scope. Now, ideally, you go end to end in a single sprint, a single iteration. And that's what I mean by working horizontally within use case. Maybe you're just delivering one little thing at the very end to the business, but that one little thing at the very end has business value, and you're also having that valuable business input on what you deliver. So you're demonstrating business value early, and I know this, no one likes to talk about failure, but this presentation is all about failure. You fail early. You figure out where the landmines are in your architecture, where your landmines are in your physical implementation. And are those landmines process? Are they people? Or are they technological? So think and work horizontally. It's important to maintain that business focus. You virtualize till it hurts. And like our favorite Canadian Data Vault instructor likes to say, avoid solutions looking for a problem. Thank you, Bruce McCartney. Continue to push problems to the right. Waterfall doesn't work well. Sometimes you got to do it, but this is an agile, focused implementation methodology. Finally, at the end, not all data is equally important. That's why we only bring in the data that we need. So when you deliver horizontally, you have business value, you have a happy customer. Now, some of the red flag statements we talked about earlier. Okay, can we dedicate a sprint to working on this obscure one-off edge use case? They probably won't say it exactly like that, but I think we know what we mean. Continue to work horizontal, continue to focus on business value. I have a feeling other lines of businesses are going to want this data set too. We should go ahead and materialize everything because I think we're going to need it. Continue to virtualize till it hurts, until it's necessary to materialize. Now we've heard this one before. Internally, you can work agile, but organizationally, we run this program waterfall. We have to report out that way. It's possible to do, but like I said, the more agile your implementation, the more successful you're going to be. Finally, we've heard this one before, by decree, thou shalt not bring in a single data element without full metadata. As commendable as this statement is, it can be an extreme deterrence to business value. Focus on metadata where it's important, where it adds business value. And so if you do work vertically, you might end up failing, and you might end up failing until it's too late. So let's walk through an example of this. Same slide, we're gonna walk through how we deliver business value horizontally. We start with our use case on the right. We have the business capability. We source that back and bring in just the data we need, model the raw data vault for what we need for that business capability. We're avoiding that big bang approach. We're delivering business value incrementally without incurring technical debt. And we don't have to refactor because it's data vault. And so, as my colleague Daniel Block likes to say, it ends up growing like a graph database. Here we go, no refactoring, avoiding the big bang approach, delivering business value incrementally, happy client, successful data vault implementation. Okay, and then moving on to DevOps. This is not meant to be a DevOps presentation, but it's part of the equation. It's one of the themes. It's something you have to do to be able to be successful and maintain that success. So DevOps, the important part of it is you focus on the people and process, more so than the tools and the technology. Let me just say this, you can't buy a DevOps mindset. There isn't a mindset tool to implement that you can buy. You got to bake it into the development process. And also another thing to think about, if you don't know how your CI/CD pipelines work, if you don't know the mechanics behind it, you're going to be in for frustration down the line. It might work today, but it is part of the development process. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of implementation. As with anything else, don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to implement DevOps all at once. Start small, like with the data vault implementation, work horizontally. And then thank you, Mike Tyson, for your eloquently said statement. Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. Reevaluate often. Your plan for DevOps today might not be appropriate after you get hit in the mouth. And I can think of an example of this where we worked on one source system where the source system owners swore up and down that there are no deletes in the application. So we decided not to implement record tracking satellites. We start ingesting data, and then Mike Tyson punched us in the mouth. We found out the source system does deletes. Thankfully, we had our automation in place, and we had our DevOps pipelines in place where implementing record tracking satellites was really a 2-day effort, not a Herculean multi-sprint endeavor. And finally, keep business value the priority. Technology does not deliver business value on its own. And as always, fail fast, fall forward. Don't waste your time doing those things that are easily automated and are low risk. So you might be able to easily automate your production deployment, but that might be higher risk than your business is really ready to accept. Now, when you start with DevOps, when you get to a higher level of maturity, the bottlenecks become readily apparent the faster you go. And so speaking of bottlenecks, we want to avoid another theme. We want to avoid becoming the bottleneck. And so as we start out, we got our delivery team sources on the left. We have our consumers on the right. And then we ended up with a use case. We deliver on that first use case. And what happens? Customers happy, consumers are happy, delivery team is happy. That's great. Now, as time goes on though, as the consultants leave and the program rolls on, the program can become a victim of its own success, where the delivery team can't scale. If they're focused in the wrong direction and they become the bottleneck, onboarding additional business capabilities becomes harder and harder. And the delivery team isn't delivering fast enough, and then that smiley face turns upside down. So how do we avoid becoming the bottleneck? Everything we talked about, you plan your departure from the beginning. You use that player coach model, you delegate. You start running teams in parallel, working independently of each other. Now the teams are driving towards different use cases. Building a data vault should not be single-threaded, and self-replicating teams are scalable if done right. You continue to ask yourself, in what I am building, the pattern I am designing, does it scale? And obviously automate, automate, automate. And then finally, production support. Don't let your life be consumed by production support.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, in review, here's a recap of our 7 themes. And this is the legalese. This is our next to the last slide. So I'm just going to read this to kind of set the stage for our wrap up. So if you can get the right teams together, and if you can socialize the standards, and if you are not required to build a field of dreams, and if you can think and work horizontally, and if you can start with an enterprise view of the data and the business, and if you can embrace industry standard DevOps, and if you can build and grow in a scalable way and avoid becoming the bottleneck, then something like this might happen. All right, we can deliver business value in a sustainable, repeatable, scalable way quickly. So assuming we have all our prerequisites, so we've done our data strategy, we've got our architecture nailed down, we've got security and tooling and access settled on, we're going to have our kickoff meeting. Kickoff meeting, like we mentioned at the beginning, get all the players in the room, you talk about the standards, you emphasize this new way of thinking, how we're delivering data as product. Data Vault is the widget factory, the data products are the widgets. We have this kickoff meeting, and after that kickoff meeting, that meeting takes a couple hours, we immediately kick off 3 parallel work streams. So what I call these are the pre-RDV work stream, the post, or the RDV work stream, and the post-RDV work stream. So your pre-RDV work stream is just getting pipelines to stage. So this is an elementary process. If anyone has seen any tool vendors recently replicating data into the cloud or even into another database, this is elementary. I've seen guys replicate hundreds of objects in a matter of minutes, even deploying that. So pipelines to stage, this task is very simple. That middle task, RDV, the enterprise model, so your enterprise data architects come in, meet with the business, and you build out that ontology and taxonomy that's going to inform your RDV backbone. And then lastly, you've got your business analyst meeting with the business, getting their particular use case, and you're going to model that business layer. It could be a report-ready table. It could be several facts and dimensions for self-service BI. But these are 3 parallel work streams that are moving independent of each other. And so once that's complete, once the enterprise model is complete, then we can build out our backbone RDV. So this is our enterprise-aware hubs and links that tell us what we're going to hang everything off of. And then also, once you've modeled the business layer, you can stub out your business layer. So again, these are parallel work streams. And once those are complete, once we've got the backbone RDV, then we can model our sources to the backbone. And I call this hanging the satellites off the enterprise-aware hubs and links. And once that's done, you can take your business layer stubs and actually connect it to your raw vault. At this point, your raw vault is built out, your business layer is connected, and you are ready to finish up your pipeline. So this is probably, again, all of these tasks are taking days, not weeks, hours, not days. This last task, pipelines to RDV, this is where we strongly encourage automation, pattern-based delivery, because this could be hours, not days. If you're doing stuff manually, it might be days, but not weeks. But once you've got those pipelines going and your RDV is being refreshed regularly, you are ready to make contact with the customer. And that, hopefully you've taken that away. That's one of the things we like to focus on. You want to make contact with the customer, with a deliverable as soon as possible to get some feedback. And my point here is none of these particular tasks are enterprise in scope or significantly onerous for a particular use case. And so what this gives us the ability to do is in 2 weeks' time, if we've got everything set up, we can deliver value to the customer in a 2-week sprint. And I think that is our last slide. Yep, and I don't know if we have time for Q&A.